Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. This will be our final segment of today's show, and we are continuing with our rankings for this week at every single position with the running back position. A lot of interesting matchups in terms of running backs that I really want to look into, and these four guys that I've compiled are looking to have pretty big games. Without further ado, let's jump right into it, starting off with Aaron Jones. And this Vikings team is looking special in terms of fantasy because nobody really expected Sam Darnold to be one of the better fantasy QBs in the league, and yet he is. No one really expected Justin Jefferson to perform as well with an unknown entity at quarterback, but he still is. But the big X factor to me over these past couple of weeks is the play of Aaron Jones. Last year, I think what really troubled the Vikings, and what would have troubled the Vikings this year, had, say, either of J.J. McCarthy and Sam Darnold played, was the struggles in the run game. Alexander Mattison was just not cutting it for them. They signed Aaron Jones, and he's been a revelation for them, and really been what makes the offense tick. He keeps them on schedule, really alleviates some of the pressure on Sam Darnold. It doesn't look like he needs it anyway, but just makes this offense a little bit more potent to think about. And I think that against the Packers, it's going to be tougher. It's their first divisional matchup, and it's always bad blood between this team. Returning to Green Bay, I think that Aaron Jones is going to be primed to have a big game. Because look, the Packers secondary right now is looking like the best part of their defense, the biggest strength. And Justin Jefferson and Jair Alexander, yes, you can say Justin Jefferson has won this matchup more often than not in terms of his play, but the way that Xavier McKinney has really helped this Packers secondary, I'm skeptical if the Vikings pass game will be as diverse as it has been in recent weeks. And so Aaron Jones will be the X factor in this game. And against the Texans, against a pretty good run defense, not the best one, 28.8 fantasy points, 19 carries, 102 yards. I think that, as the Vikings offense starts to discover its best parts, Aaron Jones is going to be utilized even more. He's like the secret sauce that makes this whole recipe even better, because the fact that Sam Darnold is playing well to start the season, and he's connecting with Justin Jefferson, and not just Justin Jefferson, but guys like Jalen Naylor, Brandon Powell, Johnny Munt even, I think really makes this offense kind of unpredictable. Because let's say the Packers do find a way to lock down Justin Jefferson in this system. I think that handing off to Aaron Jones is not a terrible contingency plan because of the fact that he's one of the better backs in the league, and they just have to give him the ball in advantageous situations, and he'll go with it as well. So Aaron Jones, look for him to potentially be a big, big fantasy star this weekend. Another guy who's getting easier and easier to predict each week in terms of his play in this Eagles offense. I really like him as one of the X factors of this offense. Really was kind of one of the differences in this game between the Saints and them. Saquon Barkley. He's going up against a Buccaneers team that's very depleted up front now. Lost Vita Vea, lost Kalijah Kancey up front, losing a lot of depth there. So look for them to try and gash this shaky Bucs defense early here with Saquon. I think that through 3 weeks, it's safe to say he's perhaps the best running back in fantasy football to have. 33.6 fantasy points against the Saints this weekend. Or I think that the only thing holding back Saquon Barkley in this offense is, the timidity of certain decisions Nick Sirianni is making in situations where Saquon could get even more chunk yardage. I think that, that drop in week 2 is kind of more an indictment of Nick Sirianni, not, taking the high road in terms of analytics and kicking the field goal and just being stubborn and wanting to feed Saquon. But if selfishness is the only thing holding back Saquon Barkley in this offense, then opposing teams should help out, because I think that even in moments where it's kind of the play to give the ball to Barkley, he's going to explode in this offense. And so I just think that, Nick Sirianni's decision-making is take it with a grain of salt, but it's not, necessarily hindering stat-wise Saquon Barkley at the current moment. So I wouldn't worry if I were either an Eagles fan or a Saquon Barkley fantasy football manager, because week in, week out, he's proving that he can make this Eagles offense more versatile. It's just a question of, whether or not, Nick Sirianni can appreciate that even more. And so, as much as, I kind of want to find a fault here, I really can't for Saquon in this offense. But, week in, week out, who knows? I just think that Saquon right now is proven to be too dominant for me to ignore him. And so, in my personal fantasy running back rankings, he remains for this upcoming week. But this is a guy coming up next who I have been much maligned about coming into this season and even in this season, and hasn't really proved me wrong. He really has been kind of stagnant. But right now, in a dire situation for his team, he's going to be looked to really help it. And so Devon Achane, I think, will have an interesting week. Only had 11 carries, 30 yards, 8.8 fantasy points. But the funny thing was, I don't necessarily think it was his fault, really. It was more a fault of Mike McDaniel and not getting him the ball more often, because they had a lot of success in those limited moments when they were running a ball against Seattle, in which Devon Achane was picking up valuable chunk yardage. And so, hopefully this week, Mike McDaniel will come to his senses and allow Devon Achane to get more touches, because they really need it. And even if, it's Tim Boyle or Tyler Huntley at the quarterback position, the smart thing to do is protecting all the quarterbacks you have, because no one knows week in, week out what the QB situation will look like for Miami at this current point. So Devon Achane, look for him to really kind of become a bell cow back, and it's kind of something that contradicts what I thought was his fault, in that he was a speed guy. Because if he's a bell cow guy, at least he's trying to keep your offense on schedule. And if he's a speed guy, it's nice to have, but you can't always rely on the explosive play anymore in this offense. So Devon Achane, yes, it's kind of a risk for where this offense sits, especially along the offensive line, because that's a huge part of the run game deficiencies they faced. But Devon Achane is still someone who I feel like is kind of forced into this conversation of guys who will ultimately get more touches in their respective systems. So Devon Achane, by kind of fate of circumstance right now, is someone who I would value in the coming weeks at the running back position. And then the last guy here that I just want to touch on, Alvin Kamara. Now, this pick is also kind of skeptical. This was also a guy that I was kind of down on this year in terms of age implications and how he was going to age and what he would look like in a Saints offense that has looked inept over the past. And for 2 weeks, he looked like one of the better running backs in the league. Yes, against the Eagles. Didn't necessarily get that much going. He had 26 carries for 87 yards, 15.7 fantasy points, as you can see on my screen. But the thing about Alvin Kamara is he's always going to be one of those physical guys who's indicative of the style of play that's required in the NFC South. And like I said, the reason why I like this Falcons-Saints game so much is because this isn't a game where beautiful offense is going to decide it. I think this is going to be a typical NFC South smash mouth game where you're going to want to grind your opponent down, out physical them in terms of every facet of the field in the game. So Alvin Kamara is lined up to really be that guy for them in this game. I really like how he profiles in this game, and I still think that regardless of who they play, it's going to be a big part of their offense. Yes, I appreciate the fact that Clint Kubiak's worked in a couple of deep shots on the field, wanting to incorporate Rashid Shaheed's verticality. Chris Olave, as always, is always good for a game or two where you expect him to really have a lot of value there. And Derek Carr has kept on schedule for the most part. Didn't look good against Philly, but Against the Falcons, expect him to get back to what we saw from the first 2 weeks. Like I said, I do still think the Falcons will upset them, but it's anyone's ball game if the Saints go to a more ground and pound attack. And that's why I think Alvin Kamara is a valuable asset in fantasy. Because I think what both of these teams can take away from each other is that if you're the Saints, as HD says, full PPR was to trade Gibbs, Ramondre, and Keenan Allen for James Conner, DJ Moore, and Brock Bowers. My current tight end is Pitts. I actually do like this trade now that I think about it, because Ramondre did not look good in that Thursday night game, and I don't like the profile of the New England Patriots right now. Jahmyr Gibbs kind of losing luster in that Lions backfield. David Montgomery has cemented himself more as the running back one there. And Keenan Allen, I don't really like the Bears offense at all, to be honest with you, because I don't know who's the wide receiver one there, or if anyone can really step up out of the wide receiver room and prove to be week in, week out a valuable fantasy asset for fantasy football managers. And then for your return, James Conner, we've talked about him a lot on this show, very valuable fantasy running back. Yes, I have questions still about the Arizona offense, but James Conner could be a valuable asset for it. DJ Moore, probably the best, let's be real, Bears receiver there is right now. And it's kind of weird to say because he has not been very good for them. But yeah, and Brock Bowers is a sneaky, interesting guy. He's going to be week in, week out a guy you're going to have to monitor, but I think he will add a lot of value as the season progresses for you at the position. As he says that his current wide receivers are Amon-Ra St. Brown, Nico Collins, Devontae Williams, Waddle, Keenan, and Keon Coleman. And his running backs, Achane, Gibbs, Ramondre, Stevenson, Eckler, Singletary, and Zach Charbonnet. 8-man league. So yeah, I really like this trade. I think that bringing in guys like Connor, Moore, and Bowers adds a lot of value and depth to your positions. I think that if you add a guy like James Conner, immediately would become the RB2 right now in that room behind Achane, maybe even the RB1, because Achane, who knows about him, and DJ Moore, a very deep wide receiver room there. I like Amon-Ra. I like Nico Collins, Devontae Smith. Yes, he's going to be week by week with the concussion, and Waddle might lose a little bit of value, but bringing in DJ Moore is someone. As HG said, would you rather have DJ Moore or Drake London, though? Now, that's a tougher question because Drake London has looked more impressive. I would rather have Drake London, but this trade that you proposed to me is one that I would have taken, even without the complications of adding Drake London to it. Because at the end of the day, all the guys that you mentioned that you're trading away are either falling down the pecking order or really don't add much value to their offense right now. So if it's Drake London, then that would be a better trade. But that trade that you did propose on paper looks really good. So thank you for that trade coming up from you, HD. And actually, that trade will just about end the show. Thank you for it. Thank you for all your comments, especially. Keep on making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here. This has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Chris Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow, same time as always, for our midweek show, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, going over Thursday Night Football, going over some more rankings, our stardom sit-ems for the Thursday Night Football game as well. But thank you all. Like, follow, and subscribe to the network and the show as a whole. Go check out some other podcasts here, the GSMC Sports Network. A lot of people doing fantastic work in that regard as well. But this has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm out.